The heading today is Unlocking Human Capital, and there's a human capital potential, and then there's we talk about the Channel Islands Women in Work Index. And looking at the audience here today, you think this is actually about women in work. Well, it is actually about women in work, but it's much, much more than just about women in work. It's genuinely about how we unlock the potential of Guernsey. We've heard that Guernsey is a wonderful place to live. We all enjoy lots about Guernsey and living here, and we all are very fortunate we're working in an environment where we can actually hopefully get the balance right between work and life and all the things that are challenging for all of us. But you know, there's so much more we can do, and there's a cloud on the horizon, because as we will share with you in a while, there's some imperative action that needs to be taken so that actually we can continue to enjoy Guernsey, enjoy all the wonderful things about Guernsey, but to also to continue to make sure that Guernsey is a viable community, it's a viable economy, and that actually government has the ability to invest and spend in places like that we've just talked about, in charities, etc. So it's really important that we get the message across. So moving forward, so Guernsey economy and the human challenge. There's a lot of messages, and we've done a lot of research in relation to actually what employers are thinking and where we are and actually what we need to do. So a lot of leaders are telling us that actually it is the lack of talent that is actually slowing down growth here in Guernsey. It is not actually the ability to grow, it's actually the lack of talent that is slowing us down. And you know, I heard over the weekend where there's talk about there's less people working in the finance industry, the industry that I work in now, than there was a number of years ago. One might think, ooh, is that a bad sign? Is that an omen that things aren't good? I would say it's the opposite. It's actually that the finance industry, as other sectors are as well, they're really struggling to attract and retain talent. There is an acute shortage of key skills. We all talk about technology, and we talked about actually being on the phone. All our children, all the next generation, how we work, how we play is all to do with technology now. And there's a huge shortage of skills in relation to technology. And what are we doing about that? There is a limited talent here in Guernsey, or one might think that, because actually we have full employment, and that's a wonderful place to be in some respects, because you know, everybody is employed. Those are the people who actually put themselves up to be employed. But what about all the people here in Guernsey who aren't working, that potentially could work? And that's the heart of what we're talking about. Ageing population and the non-working over 50s. Leila will share some statistics with you later on, but there's a lot of people, quite a few in this room, sorry, but then me included, that are over 50, who has huge energy, who wants to give more, who don't want to be written off and put to the sideline saying, when are you retiring? When are you actually going to take it easier? Actually, we have a lot to give. We have a lot to say. We have a lot to do. And actually, Guernsey needs us. So we need to make sure we're bringing people back into the workplace. And government actually needs to increase revenue. It's great to see a number of states members here today, but we all know it's been a pretty grueling last few months for the states in relation to what to do about raising revenue. So there's a big, big issue here. How are we going to do it? We think we have some of the answers in relation to that.
Thanks, Evelyn. Before I move on, we did some work with a company called Geek Talent last summer, and they identified across the Channel Islands in August last year 2,300 job vacancies. And their assertion was that actually that was the tip of the iceberg, because August is a typically quieter month for job vacancies, but also that was only the live roles that were being advertised at that time. So, you know, if you think about what we're going to talk about here, is this untapped talent pool that we already have in our islands, that we need to really think about how we can access and attract into work so that we can fill those roles. Many of us will be working in organisations where we're importing talent from the UK or further afield in our case, but that's really difficult. It takes a long time to do, it's expensive, and then when people arrive, there's real challenges around housing, childcare, etc. So importing talent is not the sole answer. So I'm going to talk about our Women in Work Index. Some of you might have seen this when we did it before a couple of years ago. So this is a global study that PwC does across all the OECD countries, so 33 OECD countries, and it looks at female economic empowerment in those countries, and it ranks them on an index from best to worst. And some of the indicators you'll see on the right-hand side that we look at is the level of female labour force participation, the difference of that between men and women, the difference between full-time and part-time, the gender pay gap, and the unemployment rate. So what we do is we look at, we gather the same data, so the same set of metrics for Guernsey and Jersey, and we plot on the index where they would fall. So in the latest index, 2023, Luxembourg actually came out top of the index. Jersey is at 15 and Guernsey is at 16. So we're just below the UK, which is in 14th place. Apologies if it's a bit small for those of you at the back, but Luxembourg is first, then it's New Zealand, Slovenia, Sweden, Iceland. Incidentally, Luxembourg, when we first did this index 20 years ago, was near the bottom of the index. So there's another story there on how they reversed their fortunes. Now, on the face of it, you might be looking at that thinking, well, middle table, I'll take that. That's not too bad. You know, it's, you know, we're a lot better than Korea and Mexico. Okay, we're not Luxembourg and Sweden, but, you know, they've got high tax rates. So, you know, middle table, that's okay. But actually, the reality is quite different, and there are some of the metrics in our analysis that are particularly sensitive and that is actually flattering where Guernsey sits on that table. And one of those is unemployment. So our unemployment rate is at 1%, and compared to the OECD, you know, that's very positive. And also our definition of unemployment is much narrower than the OECD definition. So because we've done so well in that metric, it's kind of masking some of the other things that are much more serious. For example, our gender pay gap is at 16%, which is one of the highest across the OECD. Compare that to Luxembourg, that now has a gender pay gap of 0.5%. If we were able to match the same female employment rate as Sweden, which was fourth on that index but consistently one of the top performers, that would represent a 6% boost to our GDP. If we translate that into pounds, it's £194 million if we could match the same level of female participation as Sweden has. I can think the deputies in the room can imagine a lot of ways in which you would like to spend that. Similarly, if we were to close the gender pay gap in Guernsey, that would represent a £159 million economic boost for women. So, you know, very compelling reasons why this is something that we shouldn't be looking at as just an equality issue. This is an economic imperative for the island. I'm going to talk a little bit about the motherhood penalty, and this is the kind of consequences of women taking time out of work to have children. The first one is that in Guernsey, medium earnings are 35k for women and 42k for men on average. But actually, if you look at every salary banding above 30k, the men are earning more than women. We were involved in a really fantastic study with the Jersey Community Foundation, and they studied over 1,000 people in Jersey. And one of the things that really struck us was women saying they spent 71% more time than men in an average week doing unpaid work. And unpaid work is work that could be done, you know, that you could pay somebody to do. So whether that's cleaning or childcare or you know, other caring responsibilities. So women still taking, even when they're working, the lion's share of that unpaid work burden. If any of you were watching the news in March and April, it wouldn't have failed to escape you all the attention it was getting around the cost of childcare in the UK and what the government there was proposing to do about it. And the UK has one of the highest costs of childcare across the OECD. I think it's the third highest. So the average cost of childcare full-time for an under 2 in the UK is £285 a week, or £13,695 a year. But in Jersey, and I say Jersey / Guernsey because we've looked briefly at the Guernsey figures, very similar, that equivalent childcare is £400 or £19,000 a year, making Guernsey and Jersey more expensive than even the most expensive part of London. And I think this is a massive barrier because it means you've got to be earning a really good salary to be able to accommodate that amount coming out of your net pay. And that's one child. You know, if you've got 2 children, 3 children, it's significant. And you can hear that conversation at home, can't you, when it comes to going back to work and childcare, how are we going to manage it? And the final one here, Canadian research showed it took an average of 12 years for mothers to attain an income level similar to that of women with no children. So, pretty depressing. But, you know, I can also hear we get a lot of pushback. Subsidised childcare, it's all well and good for Sweden, Denmark. You know, they've got high tax rates, we can't afford it here. GST, etc. We won't talk about that today. So I just wanted to share an example from Quebec in Canada. So Quebec as a region had a really low female participation rate in the workforce. And like us, they had a real shortage of skills in a number of industries and were desperate to really reach into the talent pool and get more women working. So they decided to adopt a policy of providing cheap, universal childcare available to all. And today, it costs around £5 a day on average for childcare in Quebec. And that's very different to other parts of Canada, that's just Quebec. But what they found was that the employability of women surged over 10 years. And it's now women aged 20 to 44 has an 87% participation rate. It's the highest in the world. And, you know, over the period, over sort of 10 to 20 years, the labour force participation rate rose to create an extra 70,000 mothers coming back into the workforce. And what they also found that the added revenue, the added tax revenue from those women coming back into work more than compensated for the cost of the childcare, the subsidised cost of the childcare. So it's a really compelling case study, I think. And look, they did not get it perfect because initially there was so much demand, far more than they were expecting. And the demand for childcare far exceeded the supply of provision that they had available. So they certainly had some teething problems those first few years, but over time they managed to iron that out. And what they found was that childcare as a profession improved, the salaries increased, and the level of care was much higher quality also. So I want to talk about Guernsey's ageing population. It's kind of a bit tricky to see this slide, and you can see all of this in our report on our website, but essentially the far left of the picture is 2016, coming up to nearest to me is 2022. And those large spikes are the increase in the over 85s and the over 65 to 84s across each year. And what you can see is the dramatic increase in the number of older people in Guernsey. And then the greens and the reds, which are declining, are the younger age groups. So 2019, total number of births compared to deaths was -6, and in 2022 it's -97. So we have a really low birth rate in the Channel Islands. So you need a birth rate of 2.2 per woman to just maintain the size of the population Ours is more like 1.2. So what that means is that over time we've got this ageing population and this shrinking working age population, which is a real issue. And the number of 85s went up 4% last year, is predicted to double by 2045. I think will potentially be even higher than that. And then we come on to Guernseys Non Employed. So these are people who are fit to work, who are of working age, who are not incapacitated, but for a variety of reasons they're not in the workforce. We have a really high number of them in Guernsey. Not just women, men and women, particularly over the age of 50, are leaving the workforce early. Now, we would struggle even if everybody worked until they were 64, 65, let alone people checking out of the workforce in their 50s. And, you know, we totally accept that everyone has the right not to work, and many people choose not to work for very valid reasons, personal reasons, or because they can afford not to. Absolutely fine. No one is forcing anybody to work. However, our hypothesis is that if some of the barriers were removed, a good number of those people could be incentivised to come back into the workforce. And you can see I've put some numbers on there, but actually since we sent these slides to Alice on Friday, we've done a bit more analysis, and we think, you know, potentially we're looking at a population of 8,000 people that could be targeted. So imagine if we even got 10%, 20% of those people, that would really plug that gap in those job vacancies that I talked about. Evelyn, why older workers?
Funny that. So why older workers? I think we, first of all, we need to dispel the myth that actually, oh, well, they don't want to work, or they're too tired, or people, they haven't got the skills. There's actually some really strong track records in relation to older work and why you should have older workers in your organisation. In fact, you should have a blended one. It wouldn't be ideal to have a number of different generations. If you think back of actually the family unit and where they say is the ideal family unit, they say the ideal family unit is actually multi-generational. I would argue that the ideal workplace is multi-generational. So the first one is actually older workers are half as likely to take off sick leave as compared to the 20 to 30-year-olds, and that's perhaps maybe just they're more resilient. Maybe they actually don't have the lifestyle that means they aren't. Whatever it is that's a fact. That's what the statistics tell us. So why wouldn't you want some of those people working for you? Our research shows that actually confidence in using technology, I talked about the digitalization and actually, you know, the challenge of that, but the reality is it's actually about empowering people. Give people the skills, let them off, and they will actually use it. And actually, the statistics again prove that once they get into the workplace and once they're upskilled, that they actually are very confident and very apt and very agile in relation to using technology. So dispel that myth that they won't do that. Working even more years referred to above, they're actually talking about 9%, sorry, let me just get this right. Okay, sorry, let me collect my thoughts there. If you actually work longer than the 8 years, for every year you work longer, you're actually healthier. There's some statistics in relation to your 11% lower risk of dying if you're actually working as if you're not working. And that's just the physicality. There's also lots of proven studies in relation to mental health. You know, we all know we come to work actually not just perhaps to do the job, but actually there's a social element to it. It's really important if you get the balance right, it's really good for your mental health as well as your physical health. People who work over 65 are 3 times more likely to report being in good health generally, and about half are likely to have serious health problems. I mean, I was amazed at this statistic. Really? You'd say such as cancer or heart disease. I think the point is, if you keep yourself young, if you're working in a multi-generational organisation, I'm not saying you're going to avoid all of these things, but the statistics proves that actually if you keep working, you keep healthy, you actually have a much better lifestyle long term. And other studies have said that post-retirement work will reduce the risk of dementia and heart attack. Again, I think it's about if you don't use, you lose. And if you're actually working, you have a better life balance and more structure in your life. Mentally and physically, you're much better off as a direct result of it. I mean, I'm a massive advocate of this. I really feel that actually, if you keep going, if you keep being relevant, if you keep contributing, that actually can be successful for everybody.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is for people who've been out of work for a while, tempting them back is really difficult because the confidence goes, there's that feeling that technology is moving so quickly, my skills aren't relevant anymore. And I think some of the evidence shows the longer you've been out of work, the less likely you are to come back. So I think there's a real onus on employers and government to look at incentives to encourage those people back and give them the tools to enable them to be successful. But we've got a few closing thoughts on what actions Guernsey should take now. So if you click again.
Yeah. So I'll start with actually what government is. I actually think government needs to take action now. You know, the evidence is in front of us. We actually have an ageing population. We actually have a significant number of opportunities that are open in our workforce. We need to actually increase revenue from government to make the investments and to do the spends that we need to do. So it's imperative that we, first of all, we use every resources we have and make sure we're tapping into it. And one of those is the non-working population that we have. And that might be older people, it might be people, women particularly, who actually have stayed at home or feel that actually they can't afford to come out to work as a result of motherhood. But whatever it is, that actually government needs to have a strategy and target the non-employed talent pool. We certainly need to review parental leave and childcare. My oldest daughter is 23. I've written to every single Treasury Minister that, since I had my daughters to actually talk about childcare and childcare credits. Because frankly, there was times in my career when actually by the time I paid for childcare, I barely had enough money to go to Boots to buy the nappies. That's a fact. But I wanted to work. It wasn't just a matter of I needed to work. I wanted to work. And I made that commitment to myself. But I can see why actually you might want to choose not to, because at times it didn't feel economically viable. We shouldn't have that in this day and age.
Well, I think, Evelyn, sort of childcare support for parents, parental leave, etc. When we spoke to our global team, they said that, in fact, the UK was one of the worst performing when they were comparing across countries in terms of all those things, and that Jersey was some way behind, but that Guernsey was significantly behind. So, you know, this is a real issue, I think, for our brand as an island, as a place to do business, as a place to come and work or set up your business. You know, there's an expectation that, you know, there's a certain level of policy and procedure in place to support parents, and I think it's just not there. Yeah. It's just not there.
And I think there's also an unconscious bias as well. You know, as a lot of parents, there's almost a view, oh, do you need to work if you're a mom, as opposed to you would want to work. And we should call that out, actually, because I think it's important that everybody works and actually feel empowered to work, and that actually there is support in society and in government and in employers to actually make sure that happens. Incentive to encourage the non-employed back to work. I mean, Leila provided the statistics to you there. It is, you know, it's clear that actually we do need to tap into that talent pool. So what are we going to do to actually encourage people back to work? Now, I, not for one moment, expect people who have actually decided to come out of the workplace at 50 plus, that they want to come back to a 9-to-5 job. But they might want to come back to a job that is flexible, that they're allowed to do something in a different way, that they can actually balance it with all their other commitments or what they actually want to do. They may feel that they've done the 9-to-5, that they do not want to be part of that rat race, but they actually still might want to contribute if that was offered to them. And I think, therefore, we need to look as employers, government needs to encourage that, and we really need to consider what does a working model look like. And I would rather, we talked about the 8,000 people that are non-employed, I would rather have 10% of each one of those and have them working than actually thinking that they're not going to be part of our workforce of the future. So we really need to think about that. Upskilling or reskilling. It's really daunting when you actually are out of work to actually come back. I can talk about that personally, even just having a couple of months off from maternity leave. It's quite quite shaky coming back and realising, can I still do the job? Am I still relevant? Will I be able to balance this with everything else I need to do? So employers and government needs to facilitate upskilling. We talk about technology and we know how important that is for future workforces. So therefore it's really important that government and employers look at this and actually see how can we encourage people back, how can we give them the skills, because the information again tells us that if they're skilled, people are very effective in the workplace. So why wouldn't we want to tap into that, give them the skills, allow them to be empowered and get them back into the workplace? So, you know, I've talked about encouragers being more flexible. At PwC, we're very proud of our record in relation to whether it's the 4-day work week, flex to work. We're continually looking at how we work and how we actually respond to what our people want and make sure we get the balance right for them. I think every employer needs to actually look at how they're working and think about, well, am I going to lose that person because they don't want to do the traditional hours, but if I flex it, what else could I get out of them? And we all have an obligation, as has government, to support people in those flexible work arrangements.
And in terms of what can business do, I think measuring targets, data, really important. I mean, many organisations, my colleague Sarah Hollingsworth there, who leads our people consulting practice, a lot of businesses we work with don't collect any data about the demographic of the workforce, let alone look at things like gender pay gap. So really encourage businesses to start looking at that. And then broaden out your recruitment strategy, because I think often you look at job descriptions and they're really targeted towards a particular type of person. We heard a business recently say to us, you know, we want more dynamic people. What they mean is they want young people. So they're discounting CVs from older people who are supposedly not dynamic or don't have fresh thinking. And that's unconscious bias right there, that I think organisations really need to look at how broad their recruitment approach is, and is it really appealing to that widest possible audience. And the same with flexibility. Again, organisations say, yeah, we're a very flexible employer, but you know, they're knowing the work Sarah does, you unpick that a little bit and it's we allow people to work from home 1 day a week. That's not the sort of flexibility we're talking about. You know, have you got roles or opportunities that could work 9 months of the year and give someone 3 months off? Do you have roles that you could have job share? You know, really being open-minded as to what might be possible. That inclusive mindset, unconscious bias, I mean, I do think there's a bit of ageism, and I think recruiters have got a real role to play here. You know, a friend of mine who's my sort of age, over 50, and has been applying for jobs recently and not even getting an interview, even though she's well qualified for jobs, and her feeling that her age is working against her. And finally, leadership-led and accountable. This is something that should not be sitting in the HC department. This is something that needs to be sponsored by the CEO, by the leadership team, to make this a priority, because every business leader we speak to talks about the talent crunch and the lack of resources. If that's really true, then all of these things should be top of your agenda. Any questions? Conscious that was a lot of data and information at a very fast pace, and that lunch is beckoning, but any questions?
2 questions, please. What did Luxembourg do, and can we do it? And number 2, you talk about leadership, absolutely, and there's lots of business leaders in the room. How do we make this accountable at the leadership of Guernsey? There's an election coming up in 2 years. How do we make this a politically important discussion? Maybe that needs to go to the deputies as well.
Shall I tackle the Luxembourg one?
I knew she was going to do that.
So Luxembourg, as I said, when we first did the index, were right down near the bottom, like 30, 28, something like that. And they, like us, had this problem of low female participation particularly, and all these jobs that were unfilled. And they actually got together, the government there, with lots of business leaders, including PwC. They gathered lots of feedback from people in work and not in work. And what they discovered was that there were actually more incentives for women to stay at home than there were to come back to work. So they then did a complete review of all the policies and made sure that everything was geared towards targeting women to come back and to make it economically a possibility, because in fact the reverse was the case. And you see the story over time. You know, it's taken 20 years, but they now have very high level of participation rate. But it was definitely that collaboration, Jane, between government and business working together on it.
Yeah, and maybe to answer the second one, more difficult one, Leila, question, and that's all right. I think, first of all, government needs to pause and actually do some research and actually really get underneath this issue. I mean, I think we have laid out what we think is a very clear business case, but I think it needs more research. So I think government does need to do some research to really understand what that is and actually define what success looks like and work with business on that. But the first thing I would say is they need to get the data, need to understand the policy in place that might actually be barriers, and then actually try and unlock them.
Yeah, I agree, Evelyn. I think certainly some benchmarking against other jurisdictions to see how we compare. I mean, we've done a little bit of that, but and where do we want to be? Where do we think for a place like Guernsey, where should we be? And what is the gap between the two? And then I think reaching out into that non-employed population and asking them, why are you not working? Would you be incentivised to come back to work? What would be the things that would entice you back to work? And then looking at, okay, how can we make some of those things a reality?
Maybe, Peter, if you wanted to step up and respond to a couple of things.
I think I've been invited up to defend the states of Guernsey, but I don't intend to do that. I intend to join in the attack, actually. And, it's been said that it was good to see a few deputies here today. No, it's not. There's fewer deputies here today than there is for most of these Chamber of Commerce lunchtime sessions. And that's appalling, because there is no more important issue for our economy than maximising economic participation. And I don't think it's just non-employed, but people are actually not as economically engaged as they would like to be. That means very often amongst females not working the number of hours they'd like to do when they need to. And one of the problems that those of us, and I know Lindsay and I, when we were on the Population Working Party, were always going on about this, and the eyes rolled, and it was, oh, this is peripheral. What it really needs is just to import a lot more people. Well, I love migration, I love diversity, but it's a road to nowhere just relying on that, because we're not just talking about the baby boomers. We have a new demographic reality where they are going to be a smaller percentage of people of what traditionally has been known as working age in our population, and we have to tap into everybody to the maximum potential. And if we don't realise that as a state, then economically we're not going to flourish. And or everything else we need to do, Bill Clinton had it right, it's the economy stupid, and you need the human resources to make your economy really work. So I do think we need to take this more seriously. Unfortunately, at the moment, the zeitgeist is all about how can we make cuts, how can we make savings, not realising that sometimes, so we brought up, Lindsay and I brought up, let's expand affordable childcare at the moment. We will be told, you don't get it, do you? This is all about spending less. Well, no, it's not. If you can spend an amount, and as has been demonstrated, actually generate more for the economy by doing it, that is a sensible way out of an economic conundrum, not just always cutting your way to a balanced situation. So I am really looking forward to my in-depth fact-finding trip to Luxembourg, because we do need to understand how other people have done it. And we do actually have now a task for PNR and ESS jointly to look at the whole issue of economic participation. And I'm going to suggest that our guest speakers here today are, if they're willing, given a slot to come along and address that working party, because I think it's essential. I'd like to thank very much all of the speakers today and say that I think that message is one that the states don't really get yet, and any help that the people in this room can lend to those of us who've been preaching this message will be really, really gratefully received. Thank you.
I know we had, thank you, Peter. I know we had a number of other questions.
Something, if I may, to what you've said. I mean, it's brilliant. I'm totally, as you know, I'm totally with you on this. There's also the sort of knock-on effect, isn't there? Because you have the younger parents perhaps who need to have childcare, can't afford it. So the parents start looking for the children, looking after the children, and they're not yet retirement age, so they could potentially be returning to the workforce as well. So there's different layers to this, isn't there? Because we've got the impact of all of that.
Yeah, if you're lucky enough to have family on the island,
yes.
yeah, which lots of us didn't have, but
Yeah,
actually if you
true.
are, but absolutely yes, and
Yeah.
we see that as well.
It's the
Yeah.
knock-on effect of everything.
It's a question beside you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm sorry, I can't come to an event like this and not do a shameless plug for where I work. So I work for Guernsey Employment Trust. My name's Nikki and this is my colleague Ali. And this is exactly what we're about. So for anyone that doesn't know, we are a charity that supports disabled and disadvantaged people into employment. And we know that there are lots of people out there that want to work, that struggle to work because of the barriers that they face. So, and one of those barriers is often the fact that they perhaps don't have the support, and that's what we're all about. So we're there to support people in the workplace and to assist with reasonable adjustments. So if you've not ever done anything with our work before, please get in contact with us because we've got a charter, we've got in-house training, but we'd be happy to just come and start a conversation. Thank you. It's been really interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk today. I recently did some work with a group called Longevity Leaders World Congress. It's on very similar topics, similar sets of analysis, and in particular working with some large institutions with big employee populations like the BBC and Unilever and so on. And we were trying to get exactly this question of how do you get older workers back in the workforce. And your roadmap is very reflective of a lot of that sort of research. There's a whole topic area which didn't come up today, which surprised me. So I was just wondering if this has come up as well, which is elder care policies as well. Childcare policies are an extremely important part of the puzzle, absolutely, but a very big gap, and we had the data on screen to start with around the degree to which the population is skewing elderly, which is not going to change and is not surprising. Did that come up at all in terms of how do we think about supporting people who are taking significant time out of work or stopping work because of elderly parents or other loved ones?
I can start.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things absolutely did come up, we did look at it, and there's only so much we can cover in half an hour, but this is where employers, when they think about flexibility, they're very targeted to working mums, and what they don't appreciate is a lot of those older workers who have those caring responsibilities for their parents who may be in their 80s or older. So, you know, when we talk about childcare, we mean sort of caring in the broader sense and support with that too. So yes, it is in there, but not drawn out so specifically.
Yeah. When we talk about Leila highlighted where women were doing 70% of the other responsibilities. I think certainly within that is the caring responsibilities as well. I would also say that this is actually where you need flexible work. It's not just for working mums, it's flexible work for everybody. Certainly the generation I grew up in, that those who did have flexible work, it was always the part-time working mums was the one. We are seeing in our organisation now where we have a number of people who have different responsibilities, and therefore it's flexibility for all. And you don't have to be female of a certain age to be actually getting those flexible working about. It should be for everybody. And that's the message I would say here.
Yes, I could comment on the politics, but I know Peter and Lindsay actually were putting forward many of these arguments in the last few months, and there were perhaps 2 key committees of the states that weren't listening. And it's interesting in the UK, Rishi Sunak, well, no, it wasn't actually, it was Mr Hunt, just increased the generosity towards childcare support for some of these reasons, and that message kind of pearled through our system. But we all on ENS will continue to fight, even though it's not been taken up by education or PNR yet. But more to the micro level of organisations, long ago I had a sort of sleeping partner investment in a recruitment agency, and some recruitment agencies would perhaps be reluctant to put forward older candidates for the sake of arguments, or those who wanted flexible working, because they would suspect that the human resources personnel of the organisations would rebuff those candidates. How can we overcome that constraint? Because it requires not just I would say, organisations, but the motivation of potential candidates and any intermediaries such as recruiters?
Well, if you think about the number of jobs, Leila referred to the number of open positions that we have in Guernsey. We don't have the luxury to be doing that. Actually, if you have a job that needs to be done, you actually need to make sure that you're looking at everybody in there. So I would sort of say if agencies are doing that, or your HR department, well, they need some sort of insights in relation to this. And this is why Leila actually referred to leadership, and it has to be accountable at the heart of leadership in organisations, because it needs to come from the top. And actually we all need to understand it's an imperative for not only for Guernsey to be successful, but for organisations to be successful. And organisations that are taking a more flexible, open approach, they will be the ones who will tap into the talent, and they'll be the ones to be able to forge on and harvest the opportunities, which are vast for us here. The opportunities are there. We said one of our messages was the greatest impediment for our growth is actually talent.
And I'd just add, in response to your, we've tried to get this on the table, but no one's interested, is just, we've got a lot more data behind this that is very compelling. And I think, shoving that under people's noses will be hard to ignore. And I think doing some cost-benefit analysis as well of, if we did the following, here is the cost, but here is the benefit, I think that would be really worth looking at too. We'd be very happy to help with that. Okay, conscious of lunch, Diane is giving me a stick.
I just think we'll take agreement with everybody.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.